Due to copyright laws, I'll make my own songs for you to enjoy. Yeah. Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. Back with another Knights of the Old Republic 2 video. This time we will be covering all influence locations for Jedi capable companions. There are a few that work for everyone, but there are some that are specific to certain companions. We will be covering all influence locations for Atton, Bao-Dur, Disciple, Mira, and Handmaiden. These are the companions that we can convert into Jedi. Some of these spots will work for other companions, like Visa or Hanhar, but I'm only going to be covering the influence locations for companions who we can turn into Jedi. So only Jedi capable companions. Maybe in another video I'll do influence locations for non-Jedi companions. Before diving into the locations, let's briefly cover gaining companion influence. So you'll need to gain influence with these companions in order to unlock new dialogue and send them down the path of the Force. Influence can be gained and lost. A good practice is to save before starting a conversation, that way you can reload if you say the wrong thing. You can get influence from agreeing with your companions and supporting their input. You can also get influence from helping others and performing good deeds unto NPCs. Disciple, Handmaiden, and Mira have quite a few influence gains just from going through all of the dialogue options. You can usually get enough influence with Disciple through the speech options to convert him in the first room that you find him in when he enters your party. Most influence gains will be from light-sided actions. A bummer if you're going dark side, but you may have to eat a few light side points until you get enough influence with a companion to convert them. I have some light side and dark side influence guides too. Check the corner if you want to see those ones. Siding your speech with a companion's views is a good way for easy influence. I'll give you a few good pointers for each companion. A good rule of thumb to keep is just don't be a dick. There's some obvious rude choices, and sometimes saying that stuff can lose influence with companions, so just stick to the more reasonable and nicer ones, at least until you get enough to convert them into Jedi. Atton is a yes man and will usually side with you no matter what you do. He likes recognition and respect, so be sure to side with him and his ideas and then thank him when you can. Bao-Dur is generally light-sided and likes when you help others and save innocents. Disciple loves the Republic and the Jedi. Show support for both to win him over. Mira is a bounty hunter who is all about the credits. Make sure to stick up for her against other bounty hunters. Arguing, followed by apologizing, also works well for her too. Lastly, Handmaiden is also generally light-sided.
I am listening.
She enjoys light-sided actions and saving innocents. She's a fighter at heart. Be sure to agree with her that fighting expresses spirit and one's true feelings. So some of these spots will work for multiple companions, but you can only get one influence gain per spot, so choose wisely. Keeping these details in mind will help you navigate speech paths a little better. Now let's get on to the good stuff, the influence locations. I will go by planets and list all influence locations for the previously mentioned companions. We will first start off with the PERAGUS mining facility. Atton is the only convertible companion we will have at this location, and there's 2 influence locations for him here. When we are boarding the Harbinger, Atton will suggest going to the bridge for the nav data. Back Atton's plan to trigger an influence gain with him. The second location will also be here on the Harbinger. Atton will mention that he has a bad feeling about continuing on. Agree with his gut feeling and be appreciative to earn yourself another influence gain. Next up is TELOS, when we are at the Jedi Academy. There's one location here for Bao-Dur, and then one location here for Atton as well. When freeing everyone from the Force cages, be sure to ask about Bao-Dur's well-being. Make sure he is okay to gain yourself some influence with Bao-Dur. Next one is for Atton. You will have to do this one before you release your companions from the Force cages. Find any one of the handmaidens and ask her about your companions. You'll be looking to talk about Atton's Echani training. Then ask Atton about it and back out of the conversation. Ask him about it a second time until you have the option to say that he is an asset. Make sure not to use the persuade option. Once we tell him that he is an asset, we should trigger an influence gain. Alright, before we jump to our first planet, let's cover an influence gain spot for Atton on the Ebon Hawk. On the Ebon Hawk, you can ask Kreia to train you in the ways of the Force. The second time you do this, you will listen to the crew's surface thoughts and you will get a cutscene of Atton playing Pazak in his head. Go talk to Atton about doing this and be sure to pick the option where you apologize for listening to his thoughts. This will trigger yet another influence gain for Atton. And now we're on to our first planet, Nar Shaddaa. This one has the most, so we will get it out of the way first. So I will cover companion-specific influence spots first, and then I will cover influence spots that work for most or all of the convertible companions. Up first again is a spot specific to Atton and Bao-Dur. We can gain influence from both companions here. In the Serikos section of the refugee sector is a broken airspeeder. With parts found around the map, you can repair the speeder to unlock it and quickly access different areas. I'll tell you real quick where the 3 parts are located. The first one is in Tien Tub's room, which is the room closest to the Ebon Hawk. We'll find the nav interface here in a metal container. And then we can get the power cell from the Ithorian on the docks. And then down here at Pylon 3, in a storage container, we will find the maneuvering flaps. These are the 3 pieces we'll need to repair the speeder. Take Atton and Bao-Dur with you when you go to install the parts.
Hey, let me take care of that.
Atton will offer to install a part for you. Let him and respond with, "I'll let the expert handle this." And then you'll gain some influence with Atton. After all the parts have been installed, ask Bao-Dur to check your work and then compliment him to trigger an influence gain. Next up is an influence spot that's specific to Disciple. In the refugee sector, there will be this guy, Huseff. He is the leader of the refugees. We will need to convince him to give up to the exchange. We will have to deal with Saquesh, the squid boy leader of the exchange here in the refugee sector. He will have a young girl held captive that he plans on selling into slavery. She will play a small role in this influence gain spot, as well as the one that I'm going to mention after this. So this will also require us to convince Nada, right here, to sell herself into slavery along with her daughter. Nada's the mother. And lastly, it will also require us to kill Gariel as well. He is the dying man in the refugee sector. This influence spot is probably for someone going dark side, as you can gain influence for saving Gariel, the dying man. After we convince Nada to sell herself into slavery, and then we kill Gariel, the dying man, then we will be able to convince Huseff to give himself up to the exchange. Once we do so, Disciple will talk to you, and make sure to pick the option I share your regret to gain some influence with Disciple. Next up is another location in the refugee sector. This one will kind of be the opposite of what we just did for Disciple. In this one, when we come to the part where we're dealing with the squid dude, he'll have Nada's daughter being held captive like I mentioned earlier. All we need to do is force persuade him into releasing the daughter Adana. Nice and simple. Once we do so, it'll trigger an influence gain with Atton, Bao-Dur, Handmaiden, or Disciple. Atton and Bao-Dur tend to soak up the influence mostly, so you may want to remove them from the party if you want Handmaiden to get the influence. And I wasn't able to test this with Mira, as you usually have to have this part done prior to Mira getting in the party. Next up is helping Lootra in the Flophouse. This will work for everyone but Mira. So it works for Atton, Bao-Dur, Disciple, and Handmaiden. You'll be tasked with finding his beloved who is in the refugee sector. Once we've removed the 2 exchange thugs from the refugee sector, we can go tell her to find her man in the Flophouse. And then we can head back over to Lootra. We will need to have Kreia in the party with us for this next part. With Kreia and the companion of your choice, chat with Lootra to trigger Kreia's nagging about helping strangers. We will be looking to select the speech option, "There is nothing I would not do for my allies." Defend your allies in the speech to trigger an influence gain with the companion that you brought with you.
So there is actually a second way to get an influence location for every companion from Lootra here. All we have to do is just simply come talk to him when we're done. Once we come back here to Lootra and his woman, we just complete the quest like normal, and we'll get our lightsaber or our part, and then we'll get an influence gain with the companion that we brought with. Works for all of them, Atton, Bao-Dur, Mira, Handmaiden, and Disciple. So if you don't want to go the route of bringing Kreia with you so you can defend your allies, then you can just help Lootra out and reunite him with his beloved, and then you'll get an influence gain with everyone. And the Kreia one doesn't work with Mira, so if you needed the influence gain for Mira, you could just do it this way. And boom, there you go. Then you would have one for her here.
2 locations left on Nar Shaddaa. Both of these influence locations will work for all Jedi-capable companions. So Atton, Bao-Dur, Disciple, Handmaiden, and Mira. It'll work for all of them. The first one is the dying man in the refugee sector, Gariel, that we mentioned earlier. He is right here on the right when we first enter the refugee sector. Use your force abilities to cure him and trigger an influence with any one of the Jedi-capable companions you brought. Nice and simple. Last up for Nar Shaddaa is the citizen near the central pit being harassed by some exchange thugs. Help the citizen by dealing with the thugs, Just takes a simple force persuade. After helping him out, an influence gain will trigger for the Jedi capable companion that you brought. It is very tempting to tell the thugs to jump into the central pit. Avoid doing this though, as the companion you brought will usually get mad at you. You used to be able to send them into the pit and still get influence with Bao-Dur, but the restored content mod may have fixed this, as I couldn't get it to work without losing influence with them. Atton is the only one who will gain influence if you persuade them into jumping into the pit. I'll touch more on Atton gaining influence later. But that's it for the Nar Shaddaa influence spots. Next up, let's do DANTOOINE. There's 3 specific locations here, and 2 that'll work for all 5 companions. Our first specific location is for Atton, and it can be triggered right away. It is right here to the right at the landing port when we first land on DANTOOINE. We will need to chat with this mechanic and make sure to ask him why so busy. We will then want to select the awareness option, and after that, the persuade option. Don't pick the force persuade option or it won't work. Do the persuade. After the persuade, Atton should chime in, and then once we leave the conversation, we will have just gained an influence with him. Next up is an influence spot for Handmaiden. After freeing Rook and leaving the Crystal Cave, we will run into Azkul, who will try to recruit us in the fight against Kunda. Make sure you give him the hard no to trigger an influence gain with Handmaiden. She will compliment you on not backing down from a fight. Next up is helping the military dude here in the field. He will task us with finding some atmospheric sensors. There are 2 influence gain spots in this quest. One specifically for Bao-Dur, and then another one that'll work for all 5 convertible companions. The first one is when we find the sensors. Make sure you have Bao-Dur in the party with you when you find these. They will be here in the first rubble pot in the Crystal Cave. Ask Bao-Dur to examine the sensors and compliment him to gain some influence. With the sensors examined, let's head back to complete the quest. Be sure to call the guy out on the surveillance equipment being in the sensors. We will be looking to get him to offer us 5,000 credits for the sensors. Once he does this, respond with only taking 3,000 because he could use the credits more. This will trigger an influence gain with any of the Jedi capable companions. 1 spot left on DANTOINE. After freeing Rook, head back to the Kunda building to offer your help in the battle preparations. Get the security card and head to this room here in the back. Activate these droids until you find Akkire's Hydro Spanner in one of them. Then head outside to Akkere right here and question him on the Hydro Spanner. Hear him out and agree not to turn him in. This will trigger our final DANTOINE influence gain for any of the Jedi capable companions. Next up is DXUN. On DXUN, and as well as ONDERON, Atton is a no-show and stays in the Ebonhawk the whole time, so none of the ones mentioned on DXUN or ONDERON will work for Atton. So on DXUN, there's 2 locations here. There's one for Mira, and then one that works for Bao-Dur, Disciple, or Handmaiden. First one is specific to Mira. Make sure to have her in the party when you come across the Duros bounty hunters. Stand up for her and say she is a real bounty hunter to trigger an influence gain. The last one on DXUN is Kumis, the Mandalorian stuck up on this ridge.
Don't touch that button, it'll blow up all my charges. No!
Fight the urge to accidentally press the button, and then clear the bomas below so he can come down. After doing so, we will trigger an influence gain. This works for Bao-Dur, Disciple, and Handmaiden. Now on to the last planet we will be covering, Onderon. We have to take Mandalore with us to Onderon, so we can only take one other companion with us to Isis. So make sure to choose wisely because you can't just swap them out in the middle of the level. There are 6 influence gain locations, 2 specific to Mira, and then the rest working for just a few of the companions. Like DXUN, Atton won't be joining us, so none of these will work for him. So the first one I will cover is preventing Ponlar's Riot in the Merchant Square. I'll explain how to get to the influence point. This influence point will require the force power Dominate Mind. It's a good one to get if you have overlooked it previously. This will happen on our second encounter with the Ponlar Riot crowd. When we first enter the Merchant Square, we can trigger our first encounter. Simply walk up to the crowd and get through the dialogue, and then be on your way. I usually head over to Dagon Gents, and then when we come back, we can trigger the second encounter. Once back, make sure to use the 2 Force Persuade options to prevent Ponlar's Riot. This will trigger an influence gain for Bao-Dur, Disciple, and Handmaiden. We will also use this Riot crowd to trigger another influence gain spot for Mira. Anda, right back here, will give us a side quest. She won't speak to us unless we openly voice against the Queen during the Riot crowd encounters. So at either encounter, the first one or the second one, voice your support for Valku, and then she will speak to us after. She will have a side quest involving removing 3 guards from their post. Agree to the quest and be sure to tell Mira that the credits are hard to ignore. This will trigger an influence gain with her. Next up is another location specific to Mira. It will be when we come across this Twi'lek bounty hunter. Like on DXUN, stand up for Mira and say something close to, "I won't let you insult my companion." This should trigger another influence gain for Mira. The next 2 locations will come from giving someone an open starport visa. First up is the Republic soldier we find in the Isis Cantina. Give him an open starport visa to gain influence with Beodur or Handmaiden. I swear this used to work for Disciple too, and maybe it still does in the vanilla version, but I tried about 7 times in 7 different ways, and I just couldn't get an influence gain to trigger with him. Next up is the mother, Terlyn, we come across at the beginning of the Merchant Square. Give her an open starport visa to trigger an influence gain with Disciple or Handmaiden. That leaves us with our final influence gain location. It will happen right after our meeting with Master Kavar goes south. It works for Beodur, Disciple, Handmaiden, and Mira. After Kavar dips, one of these 4 companions will mention being cautious as to not harm civilians. Agree with obvious, or of course to trigger a gained influence with the companion you brought. And that's it, my friends. That's every influence location for your Jedi-capable companions. There is one other way to gain influence with Atton. When going dark side, there are quite a few people that you can murder. Doing so will grant you influence with other dark side companions like HK, Visa, and Hanhar. Since Atton is a yes man, and it's hard for you to do no wrong, murdering randoms and responding reasonably will gain you influence with Atton. Here is a list of the murderable NPCs that you can kill to gain some influence. It might not be all of them, but it definitely is most of them. Credit to Dan Simpson for putting this up. I have this linked in the description below if you want to check it out. Some of you might have heard about the Kreia effect. It's where you keep Kreia in the party and murder randoms to get her to start nagging. You ask her what she would have done, and then you no longer lose influence with the companion that you have with you. This is talked about a lot online, and I'm not sure if the restored content mod alters this at all, but no matter what I did, I still lost influence with the Jedi companion that I brought with me. Due to this, I didn't cover it. Let me know if this is or isn't working for you, as I am genuinely curious. I hope this video has helped you all out, or at least been a little bit useful. All the online information about this that I came across was very dated, or it wasn't tested with all of the other Jedi companions. So I decided to test it all myself, and I'm super glad that I did. There were a few of these that I didn't know worked for the other companions. Took way longer than expected to go back and test each spot with every companion. I do appreciate you all coming to check out the video. Throw a like on here if it helped you guys out. Make sure to get subscribed if you're not already, so that way you can see all the latest vids as they come out. Reach out in the Discord or the comment section with any questions and I'll do my best to answer. Thanks again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.